Hello, compositing and special effects students. Emily here with our first lesson of the class, and that is just an overview of chroma-keying and masking so that we can remove a background and get the footage we want. So I have kind of a little iPod demo here. I also have that same footage in front of this very convincing dance club. We'll add some more detail to that later. And I have our college's lovely mascot here, who's not dancing that slowly in real life. That just makes him that much creepier. But this is some green screen footage we shot in our studio a few years ago. And it's a great example just because of the fuzzy edge. Not everything is going to be easy to key. So I just want to talk about kind of the basics of how to go about this. And the dancer footage and the Wolfie footage are available in that week 2 folder. And I'm going to go to my footage here. I've created a few folders just to make this a little bit more organized. And there's our original footage shot in front of the green screen of the studio. You can see we have this dancer lit, but not the best lighting. We're going to talk about lighting more later in the semester, but it's not too bad. We have a soft shadow against the green, and really what we want is for the background to be as solid of a color as possible. When we remove it, we're basically going to be sampling it with an eyedropper, and the more consistent that color is, the easier it will be to remove it. Now, we don't have the largest green screen in our space, so we also have the background of just the studio itself. And because that's not green, we need to get rid of that a separate way. So in motion design or just your experience with After Effects, you've hopefully learned about masking. But masking is just a non-destructive way to hide or reveal part of an asset. So I want to make sure that my layer is selected. If the layer is not selected and you use your drawing tools, whether it's the primitive shapes here or the pen tool, you're really just going to end up drawing a shape layer, which is useful, but not what we're looking for. If I have that layer selected, that same tool, when used on a layer that's selected, once you close the path, that will actually create a mask. And the default is that anything within the shape is revealed, anything outside of it is hidden. And it's a vector path just like you would see in Illustrator. Now, if we twirl down our layer here, we can see that in addition to the transform options that are always there, we have a mask option now. And if we twirl down the mask option, we've got mask 1. We could have multiple masks on a layer. And you know, After Effects is all about the twirl down menus. And here you can see 4 different attributes that we can change and animate. We have the mask path, the mask feather, which just softens that edge, the mask opacity, and then mask expansion, which isn't so helpful for this, but it's a neat way to create a transition when doing a title sequence or animation, etc. So I'm going to delete this mask for now and start over. It's non-destructive. I just had the mask selected when I hit delete. With this layer selected, I'm going to use my pen tool since I need a custom shape. I'm going to go Command- just to zoom out a little bit here. And I'm just going to draw on the inside of this green screen. I don't want to use more points than necessary. That just means that if I have to rotoscope or animate this, I've got that much more to do. And once I close the path, you can see that everything inside of it's visible, everything outside of it is hidden. If we turn off the composition background, you can see we have transparency there. The default setting for a mask is add, which just means that anything within the vector area is revealed and anything outside is hidden. We can change that by clicking on the drop down, and we could hide the mask entirely just by choosing none. That we'll see the mask edge still. We can turn that off by going to View, Show Layer Controls, which is checked on. If you find that mask edge distracting, you can turn it on and off, though just keep in mind you can't edit what you can't see. So if we wanted to change the points of that mask, we can't unless we make those points visible again. So I'm just going to go View, Show Layer Controls to check that back on. And we also have subtract, which will do the opposite of add. You can use inverted as well, but I don't recommend that because there's a certain relationship between the masks when you use multiple ones, just like with intersect. And then you've got light and darken and difference, which honestly you aren't going to use too often. None, add, subtract, and intersect are really the main options I would focus on. So I'm going to keep this at add, which is the default. And now that I have everything outside of the green screen removed, I need to get rid of the green itself. I'm just going to make sure that my layer is selected. You always have to select to effect. And I'm going to go to my effect menu and go down to keying. So keying or chroma keying just removes a color that's selected. And there's quite a few options in here, but I highly recommend using Keylight. 1.2 is the version. Some of these do a similar thing, but this is going to give you the most control and therefore the best outcome. So I'm going to choose Effect, Keying, Keylight. And in the upper left, remember you've got your project window under that tab to see your composites and assets. And right next to that is the Effects tab. So here I've got Keylight, and the very first thing I want to do is sample the screen color. So I want to sample what I'm removing. And most commonly that's green or blue, but it really would work on any color. So I'm going to select that little eyedropper and then click on the green. Now I want to click on a green that's somewhere in the middle value-wise. So not too bright, not too dark. I'm going to click right here. And because I have the alpha channel visible, you can see what is removed. Now there are some shadows here. If we scrub through, we can see most of it's gone. It's just RAM previewing there. I'm going to turn my render to half, just so it takes less time. It is going to be a little more pixelated, but that's always the sacrifice here. This has nothing to do with how it renders in the end, it's just how it RAM previews. But looking at that, if we zoom in a little and turn that background back on, you can see that there's still some residual green screen here. So to remove that, I just need to adjust these settings. So first we sample the color, we've done that. You can adjust gain and balance. However, I don't think the results of this are as good as they can be. We just gave him a severe sunburn there. I'm going to undo twice. What I would recommend is going down to our screen matte options. And under screen matte, we're going to choose to clip the black and white settings. So this is going to adjust the contrast point. And what we could do just by scrubbing clip black, you could see that I could actually remove most of that residual color. However, if I go too far, we've just recreated like the Ultron effect here, but that's not what I'm looking for. So I want to adjust this so that my background is totally transparent and that my subject is opaque but also has a good edge. And you really can't just judge this by one frame. You'd want to scrub through. And if the lighting suddenly shifted, like if you were outside for some reason, any one of these attributes can be animated as shown by the keyframe icon next to it, the little stopwatch. So if I just scrub through this, I'm going to RAM preview and see if I have any other residual color or shadows. Looks pretty good. I'm going to turn the background off here. And one of the most important things about compositing is having a good edge. You don't want it to be too hard, but you also don't want to lose the definition of the subject. And I tend not to adjust that until I have a background. I do see one error here. His shoes, which are blue, have just enough green in them that they're slightly transparent in places. If we go and turn the key light effect on and off by clicking on this little effects icon, you can see that it's removing some of that color. So to fix something like that, I actually am just going to duplicate this whole footage. I'm going to rename this top one shoes. If I double click, it's just going to open in the footage mode. I want to click on it once and hit return. And let's just call this shoes. And I'm going to use my masking tool. And I'm going to add a mask onto the mask we already have. So I'm just going to use this oval and encapsulate the shoe area here. And I might have to animate this based on how much he's moving around, or I can make it bigger. We'll worry about that in just a moment. I added a second mask, and by default it's set to add, so I actually want this to be intersect instead. So this new mask, I'm going to choose intersect, and it's not going to look any different unless I turn that other layer off. So you can see now it's just keeping what's within that garbage mat and this new mask of the oval. And the only reason I would do this is so that I can adjust this layer a little bit differently than the one below it. So if I go to my screen mat options again, I would adjust the color to try to get those shoes more solid. If I turn the visibility of the shoes layer on and off, you could just see how that added that color back in. And if I scrub, we want to make sure that that oval follows it. So we're just going to do a little bit of animation here with the mask path. I'm just going to twirl this down and go to this orange mask as seen by its color. If you want to change the color, if it's too similar to another one, you can just click. I really just made it still similar. Let's go with the green. You just have to click on that little color swatch there. And I'm just going to twirl down the mask option so I can see mask path. I'm going to double click on the mask so that I'm transforming it rather than just moving an individual point. And I don't think we have to really get too crazy with position here. We could probably just make this a little bit bigger and then have it animate left and right. So I'm just going to click on my mask path keyframe and just kind of scrub ahead. Right there, his shoe kind of goes out of the way. So I'm just going to raise that up a little bit to keep it in. And then let's drop this back down a little bit. I could just make it bigger overall, but there's really not too much variation. And this is mask path, not just position, so I can also just change individual keyframes, which gets a little bit more into rotoscoping, which is something we'll be covering in upcoming classes. There's a little bit of heel there. I'm really overthinking this because I could just make this quite a bit larger and not have to add all these keyframes. But what fun is that? So if I go back to the beginning, it looks like that's pretty much covered, except for that very beginning spot. All right, so if we scrub through, we can see this mask. And remember, all this is doing is just keeping those shoes with a slightly different key light setting. So I'm just going to zoom this back out. And if we just RAM preview the whole thing, you can see it looks a little bit better, and now his shoes are more present. We'd want that to happen because otherwise when we add a background, we would see through them, which is really going to harm the believability of our composite. Speaking of, I'm going to add a background here. I have this campus image here. Since we can't be at school physically, I'm just going to pretend we're there virtually. I'm going to scale this image up. And let's just move it so there's a little bit more ground here. And he is huge in contrast. Now, he is comprised of two different layers now. It's just the shoes and the dancer layer. I have a few options here as far as keeping them together. There is no grouping in After Effects, so I think the best option would actually be pre-composing this. So I'm going to select both of my layers, and I'm just going to choose to pre-compose. I'm going to right-click and go to Pre-compose near the bottom, and let's call this Dancer Complete. So I'm going to click OK, and really that just collapses those two layers into one. You could see the little pre-compose icon there, and if I double click, I just go into that setting. So I've got multiple tabs up here that I can go through. And so with this layer selected, I'm just going to scale it down by clicking S. And remember that things in After Effects change based on where that origin point is. Right now this is kind of in the middle of the layer. I might want to use my pan behind tool and maybe put that more like his feet. Because if I wanted to rotate or do something else for some reason, it would do it from there. instead of his head or waist. I'm not going to do that, but I could. Let's zoom out a little bit more, and I'm just going to bring this down. One thing that's a little bit weird is the bounding box of this guy is larger than the asset, but that's because of the size of this composite, which is really larger than it needs to be. That's because of the original green screen footage. So that would be another option if we wanted to, is we could go to our composition settings and we could reduce the width and make this more of a square. Not necessary, but if you wanted the bounding box to be a little bit tighter, you could do that. And then back in this composition, you can see it just takes up less space. It's like when you import a PSD and choose to retain layer sizes versus the composition size. So I just want to find a place to put him. I'm tempted to put him in the grass here, not that that's creepy or anything. But if we RAM preview it, we could just get a better idea of how that looks. I'm just going to actually, eventually in an upcoming lecture, I'm going to add a shadow and make this a little bit more believable with the scene. But since we have another person here for reference, I'm just going to scale him down. And he's just going to be this weirdo that's dancing off to the side. He's a tall guy, so it's hard to judge how exactly big he should be. All right, now that we have a dancer on campus, I really think that we need to add our beloved mascot as well. So I'm going to create a new composition based on my Wolfie footage here. We're just going to click on our footage and drag it down to the new composition icon. And here we have our dancer. I'm going to turn the resolution down to third, just because this is a slightly longer clip, so it's a little bit bigger of a file. And here we have footage shot in the studio again. This time the lighting is a little too dramatic. You can see there's some hot spots versus the shadows. You want the green screen to be as even as possible, which is something we're going to focus on in the upcoming weeks, and lessons rather. So the other thing that's different here is the edge of this character. Because it's a furry thing, if I just turn the resolution back up a moment, you can see it's almost like there's a motion blur even when it's not moving. There's a really soft edge overall, other than the top hat, which happens to be mine, but of course, I would bring such a prop in. And I just made the monocle out of some part of a lens, because, this kind of work requires just problem solving. So we've got Wolfie dancing around here. I want to remove the background. I'm going to use the same steps that I did for the dancer. First, I'm just going to change our resolution. Let's go half, actually. And that was the sound of one of my cats sneezing, but never mind that. I'm going to go to fit. And I need to do my garbage mask first. So with the footage selected, I'm just going to go to my pen tool. And it's all right to draw kind of outside of the screen if you need to. For this one, I just work right in here. And remember, you don't want it to be like a sewing machine and keep placing a lot of points. Don't be afraid to use those directional handles. Something like this, I might even just mask it out with a separate one. I could always go back and fix that. Gonna move down a little bit. I'm just using the hand tool, which you can select in the toolbar, but really any Adobe program, if you hold on the space bar, you'll get the hand tool, which allows you to move around. And I'm just going to continue this path. And I'm actually going to get rid of those sandbags a different way. Because masks are set to add by default, everything within the path is visible, everything outside is hidden. If I click M on my layer that's selected, we can see our mask settings, and we'd be able to adjust that from there. I'm going to add 2 additional masks to hide these sandbags. First, I'm just going to get rid of some of these points. So with the pen tool, if you hover your cursor over a point, you can actually remove one. And I can also just hit the delete key, which is unlike other programs. But if you see, if I hover my cursor over the path where there's not a point, you'll get that option as well. So I can actually just bring this in. Or if I want to create an intersecting path, like I did with the shoes, just as an example, I'm going to select my footage, I'm going to draw an additional mask. Each mask will have a different bounding box color. And you can see this add is just adding it to the other one. I'm going to actually choose subtract, which will punch it out of this other mask. And I made it a little bit bigger than we need it to be. But now when we key it, we don't need to worry about that shape. So I also want to scrub through and make sure that my subject stays on the green screen. You could see right here, he's way off of it. So we could animate and rotoscope that, but I actually included that little bit because it's kind of before the dancing. And he's adjusting his gloves. So I'm actually going to just start right before that clap. And we can trim our composition just by pulling in the work area handles. Just so this renders faster, I'm actually just going to choose, we have to include the awkward spank dancing, because that's really what our mascot should do all the time. I am going to adjust my work area here by dragging on these blue handles. And you can just use those as a way of just previewing part of your composition, which is really helpful when it's slow. I'm actually going to use this to trim the comp area down by just going to composition, trim comp to work area. Of course, we can change the length of it as well from going to composition settings. So you can change the overall length, the resolution, the time. And in this case, we actually want to restart the time code. It kept the time code from the original footage. You can see it's starting at 2:41. So I'm just going to add my zeros here. Remember, it's hours, minutes, seconds, frames. So I want all zeros there, and if I click OK, now our timeline starts where it should. So with my footage selected, I'm going to again go to Effect, Key Light. It's under the Keying menu, but one nice thing in After Effects is the last thing you use is listed at the top here. So I'm just going to select Key Light, and I'm going to select my eyedropper tool and click it on a green that I think is somewhere in the middle value-wise. And you can see because of those heavy shadows, we have a lot of leftover black here. We can try clicking on a different color if need be, but I think this will work fine. We could always turn this on and off as well. And it's something that you can animate. You've got your stopwatch there. So I'm going to twirl down my screen matte options, and I want to adjust the clip black settings. And I can get rid of most of those shadows. If I go too far, it's going to start. You can see it's actually getting out the shadow areas here. If we turn our background back on, you can see that purple showing through. So you'll definitely know when you go too far. And then if you have problematic areas, you just might have to do additional masks. So I'm going to clip the white as well. And for something like this, he never actually goes that far over. So don't overthink it either. If you don't need to use an area, just mask that out entirely. Our subject never goes that far over. I think that looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a shadow area here. I'm just going to adjust that. Still getting a little something here. But I think that looks pretty good. We have some shadow underneath him, but that's his shadow. So that's not unusual that that's there. Now, if I add a background to this, or just turn the alpha channel off, you can see that the edge has a hardness to it. Let's go back up to full resolution. So because it's fur, we really don't want it to be this definite of an edge. And that's where we can choose some of these other settings. So clip black and clip white is the main thing that you would use to remove the background. But you can also adjust the screen softness. And if you go too far, you're going to get this fuzzy aura thing going on. But if you adjust it just a little bit, you can get a nice soft edge. You can also do screen shrink and grow. And this is ideal if you have an edge you're trying to get rid of. You could use a matte to do a similar effect under Effect, Matte Choker. However, I really think that just Screen Shrink Grow works better, and it's animatable. It's part of Key Light, and then we can change it over time based on what we need to do. Something we'll be talking about in an upcoming class is adjusting the spill or bounce light on the subject. and being able to do screen shrink grow and using some of these despill options is really helpful there. So I think Wolfie's looking pretty good. I'm going to go back to our scene at the college here, and I'm going to bring in his composition. And he's looking really bright compared to everything else, but that is okay for now. I think we should make him like Godzilla size. That trailer just came out. Or he's just closer to the camera. And now if we watch both of those, these guys are both just getting down in front of Truax. And the edge on our dancer looks pretty good, though honestly, if he's that far away, it would probably be a slightly softer edge. But Wolfie's looking pretty good here. And I think that's just the last thing I'll do is I'm just going to zoom in. And remember, this is a separate composition now. So I'm just going to double click on that to go into the settings. And I'm going to go to the main footage, not the shoes. I'm going to go to my effects. I'm going to twirl down screen matte. And I'm just going to add a little bit of screen softness. If I go too far, you'll definitely see it. But then if I go back to our main footage, it just kind of blends in a little bit better. And if I had kept the attributes in this composition, I'd be able to change them in here. Totally up to you as far as what works best. But let's go back out to fit this. And let's go to full resolution. And if we just RAM preview a little tiny bit of this, because my computer does not want to do more than that. I keep moving this by clicking on the gray area, which is moving the whole bar. I just want to grab the little blue handle there. And so let's just RAM preview this a little bit. And now you can see our, it's a horrifying loop, but you can see that we have our two pieces of keyed footage. And in the next class, we'll talk about how to add more realism using lighting, shadow, and color adjustment. So please practice using these two files. You could put them against any background that you want. I just want you to practice the skill sets that we covered in this video.